Gold and silver. Is it the time to invest? Well, in this video, I'll be making the case for gold and silver. In terms of the reasons why, I put this down to two factors. One, rising inflation and inflation expectations. And two, a bid to safe havens. And I'll be going through in this video expanding on why these two factors could be making a good case for gold and silver. To start with, what is inflation? Inflation is a general increase in prices and a fall in the purchasing value of money. That means the money in your pocket is worth less than it was last year, so you can buy less goods and services with that money. Now, what's happened recently, because of the amount of stimulus in the economies globally, inflation has started to rise. Here's a headline showing US inflation hitting a 39-year high, with CPI hitting 7% in December. It's the same story in the Eurozone, with a new record high as inflation hit 5%. And here in the UK, where I'm from, inflation hit its highest level in 30 years, with prices rising by 5.4% in December. So what does this all mean? This is a chart of the price of silver against US inflation and the 10-year treasury yield in the 70s, when inflation was this high. What we can see from this chart is that inflation and yields rose, so did silver. There's been a lot of talk about rate hikes being a negative on precious metals. But looking at history, when inflation was this kind of level, investors flocked to hard assets like commodities, which benefited the likes of gold and silver. You can actually see inflation took off first before both silver and the 10-year yield started to really rise. Silver actually made a high before inflation did, and the 10-year yield followed last and headed lower in the early 80s. If we now have a look at this chart, which looks back at the last 10 to 11 years, a similar pattern is emerging. Inflation is rising and has spiked to 7% in the US already. You can see both price of silver and the 10-year beginning to rise. This chart only covers data to the 1st of Jan, so it doesn't take into account the last week's movement, which has really seen the price of silver and the 10-year yield move much higher as it tries to catch up with inflation. What looks clear from this chart is the inflation we're currently experiencing has a lot of parallels with inflation from the 70s. And if that is the case, we could see the price of both precious metals and yields rise much higher. The second factor I noted was the bid to safe havens. If we have a look at this chart, which is the weekly performance of certain assets, you can see both gold and silver outperforming the likes of the S&P 500, the Nasdaq, Bitcoin, and the euro against the dollar. What that shows is precious metals getting bid up, suggesting a fear in the markets, and we've seen a sell-off in equities this week. So that's another positive for the likes of gold and silver. Before I finish up, let's have a quick take on the technicals for silver and gold. So if we start with silver, this is the daily chart. You can see that silver broke through a bullish pennant this week, with momentum taking it above the key 2360 resistance level and above the 200-day moving average. This has been a good week for silver bulls in what feels like a momentum shift after price has been moving sideways to down over the past few months. To have a technical pattern break to the upside and then for price to break a key resistance level and a moving average is a real statement. If you connect the recent highs in August and November last year, there is potential for silver to go as high as 25 before cooling off. Momentum is now firmly with the bulls. If we now look at the gold chart, we can see gold set up a bull flag pattern after holding above the key rising trend line in black. Gold this week played out its bullish flag pattern perfectly, breaching key resistance area 1836 to 40 in the process. It's now imperative that price doesn't fall below 1823 to 25 to avoid a loss of momentum, as price is likely to cool off a bit before pushing higher. Immediate upside potential is around 1865 to 67. With that said, that's my weekly update. Thanks again for watching. Remember to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any future content. And I'll see you at the next one.